got them, right?
Notes right there.
Lights.
Make sure my phone is We're deciding what to wear today, for example. Apple Watch off. Are you guys okay?
It's on. Can I start talking yet? No. Hello.
These chairs are like... Oh, I did want to post.
Ready? Hey, everybody. Thank you all for coming out. Give me 1 second.
Where are you? Yeah, there. It's the disembodied voice of AI.
All right, cool.
Hey everyone, welcome to the AILA event, co-hosted with Google on AI in the classroom. We're really excited to have you out here. You're one of the fortunate 250 who made it in, so give yourselves a round of applause. We were way oversubscribed for this, and we're really excited to have you here. I'm the vice president of AILA. My name is Ross Mead. I've known Todd for a few years. We started this a few years ago, and it's been blowing up. And I'm just here to be Todd's hype man. So as a VP, I do about 1/10% of the work. A lot of the other work is done by awesome volunteers. So I want to point them out because we don't usually get to. So where's Arturo? Arturo, where you at, buddy? Arturo right there. Jorge, thank you, Arturo. Jorge back there. Charlie right there taking pictures. Collectively we do maybe 10% of the work, I'd say, and Todd is out there doing 90% of the work all the time. This is his life. This is everything that he does. He's the hardest working man in the AI LA business. So I'm going to hand it off to him. This is Todd Terrazas.
Thanks, Ross. It's the first time I get to have a hype man. It's pretty cool. But also what's really cool is that you're all here and we're here at Google. So thank you, Google, for giving us this space and this platform to really talk about AI in the classroom. We started this 3 years ago as a hobby. Seriously, I was running a tech company doing chatbots, and then it spun into AILA, and then only in the last 5 months we decided to go nonprofit, full-time, and really build out this community. With the real mission of democratizing AI and developing Los Angeles to the AI hub for social good. So thank you for being part of the beginning of this madness. It really is only happens because I have an amazing team behind me, I have a great board behind me, I have advisors, and obviously an amazing community. Jorge, as we talked about before, was the generous person that developed our great logo. I forgot to have the stickers. We have great decals. So find me later at the networking event, and I'll give you guys a decal you can throw up on your car, your computer, wherever you want to throw it up. Charlie has been instrumental. He's taking photos right now. He's the reason why we're live streaming right now with a perfect quality, feed. Arturo has been instrumental again because of his team has been able to really help us really workshop exactly what our 5, 10, 20-year plan is, and that's why I'm more focused than ever before about what we got to get done to make sure that Los Angeles is the beacon of hope for the rest of the world to see of how we can really use these new technologies to really do good in the world. But tonight is really special. My grandmother once used to say that the greatest gift you can ever give is education because you never give it back. And so I'm really happy tonight we get to all come here together to talk about how artificial intelligence can really help impact the classroom, really make teachers, more empowered, especially the underserved, the ones that are overworked, underpaid, and just, underutilized. And hopefully there's a way that, technology like AI can really help them. And I believe that everyone should have a free access to, a proper education. And so anyways, I have this one time to have my platform, and here I do. But without further ado, none of this really would have been possible without our amazing, fearless fighter, Eve Pasalti.
No, okay. I have a big team.
All this here, as you have known probably in your own lives, the only way you get anything done is having champions in your life that believe in you early. And Eve has been believing in me and AILA early. So thank Eve for all of this, because none of this would have been possible without Eve.
No, it's okay. Thank you. You're too gracious. It's fine.
But now, this is Eve's show. So Eve, please take it off.
Thank you so much, Todd. And again, thank you so much for coming, and hello to our live viewers as well from the streaming. I know you have a million other things to do on a Thursday evening, so we really appreciate that you make the trek all the way to Venice. And on behalf of Google, we want to welcome you all. We have an amazing panel that I'll let themselves introduce their role, their experience, and then we're going to have a really cool discussion around the role of AI in education. I know we all have some type of experience and interaction with a bot, with a digital assistant. Driverless cars are becoming a reality. And there are a lot of exciting things that are coming, especially in the education space, that are transforming the classroom, the role of the educator, and how we learn. And we're going to talk about that. There are also, at the same time, some considerations, some drawbacks, some things to worry about when it comes to bias, when it comes to other things that we might not need to overlook. So we're going to explore that. We're going to discuss this. Then we're going to talk about the role of employability, and not only AI and how it's changing the classroom and the way we learn and the way we teach, but also how it's creating new jobs, new opportunities when people graduate. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to end on a futuristic and positive note, and then we're going to take your amazing questions as well. All right, cool. So I want to start with some introductions. I'm really flabbergasted by the quality, the expertise, and the skill set of this panel. I'm really honored to share the stage with you. So I'm going to start with you, Liz, first, and tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll go with our first question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Liz. I'm a learning data scientist. I like to play at the intersection of learning science, virtual worlds, and machine learning to help support student education and personalized instruction. I have a PhD in digital media and learning analytics from UW-Madison. I'm currently director of learning data science at Age of Learning, and as well as a consultant for learning data science in virtual worlds and research design. I really specialize in data science for AI-based and ML-driven virtual worlds, including personalized learning and game-based learning and simulation-based instruction. Previously, I worked at EA Games at a subsidiary called Glass Lab Games for modded versions of educational games like SimCity EDU, Plants vs. Zombies EDU, and Words with Friends EDU, where we worked in that space to give basically formative, ongoing assessment of what students were learning as they interacted with the game. I worked in the education for about 10 years. Previous to the EA work, I worked with Learning Games Network, ETS, and the Department of Education, basically looking at what is salient data to collect in complex learning environments. How do we collect things succinctly but comprehensively that can be standardized across whole systems? And lastly, really looking at salient data architecture and learning worlds was graduate work. I was a teacher for 10 years before going to graduate school, so I know very well what it's like to be in a classroom of underserved students and really wish you had more tools. I really believe in the potential for technology and especially AI-based learning to support teachers in classrooms and to help revolutionize learning and even help close the achievement gap.
That's all.
Sorry.
We're done.
That's all. I talked way too long.
So Emily,
That
you
was
come
great.
from the famous X Prize organization. I've always wanted to meet someone.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I work at X Prize. I'm the executive director of the Global Learning X Prize, which is a competition, global competition for people to create interactive software, learning software for out-of-school children. We just completed a field test in Tanzania on Friday. So we had children using interactive software in 170 very remote villages in Tanzania for 15 months. So we will be announcing the grand prize winner of that competition at Google, the Playa campus, in just under 2 months. And then all of the software will be open sourced. So both the Swahili and English versions will be open source for the world to build upon. So what I'm hoping to talk about and have us all think through a little bit is what are the next steps in terms of education? How are we making sure that what we're designing is actually reaching children everywhere, whatever their background may be, and it's not just what we're testing in a lab or here in the United States, but really looking at children for whatever their circumstances and making sure the designs reach them, work for them, and have some sort of sustainability in their communities. Before working at XPRIZE, I was a college professor, so I taught for over 10 years, and there's a lot of AI technologies I wish I had when I was teaching, so I'm really curious to hear what our higher education specialists have to say about AI in the classroom in that way as well.
Great. Thank you. And Margot, you have some amazing STEM experience.
Yeah. So I'm more of an entrepreneurial type. So currently I work for a startup called Mersion. We're based in San Francisco. And we actually design virtual reality simulations to train teachers in the classroom. So we build virtual classrooms, and we're in schools all over the country. And now we've moved into corporate learning and development. So we've trained thousands of learners globally. And we focus mostly on using VR and AI to develop social, emotional skills in people, which is sort of like the #1 area that corporations and schools are really looking for technology to fill that gap. And I'm also the founder of a school called the Los Angeles School of Creativity and Technology, which is so much fun. It's called CTech for short. And we work with kids in South LA in particular. We started it because of some of the alarm statistics around computer science. I was at a Code.org event and heard that out of 10,000 kids that took AP Computer Science in California, only 145 were Black and only 1,200 Latino. So we are focused on training kids in computer science from kindergarten through 12th grade, and we even want to open an adult school for parents. And so CTech, we sort of remix computer science, offering virtual reality, robotics, music engineering, and I forget the other thing, 3D art for kids to really build and create. And we run entrepreneurship events and Kid Shark Tank events so that kids can start their own companies. So
That's awesome, and so much needed.
This is awesome. Yeah.
And then representing the higher ed front, the whole higher ed front, we have Allison from USC.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Oraqua. I work at USC in an institute. I lead an institute that supports clinical research. So I don't often work in the actual classroom, but I work with the faculty members who are designing clinical trials to help one day deliver better care. And so in my position leading special projects and innovations, I have managed a project with a Google company, Pluto 7, that does AI and ML, and we have taken a piece of the clinical trial activation process and shown that we can automate part of it to try to eliminate some of those administrative hurdles that are really creating a barrier to timely research in the effort to get effective treatments out to patients more quickly. I'm trained as a neuroscientist by background. I went to USC in grad school as well. And then I worked for the Department of Education in DC, helping them decide which research projects to fund, and I helped edit national reports on national education statistics.
That's great.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. And last but certainly not least, we have Carol with an amazing STEM background.
So currently I work as a STEM plus C specialist. What my main goal is working with teachers and providing curriculum and the confidence to put computers, robots, that different kind of thinking, and because that's our biggest fear with our teachers is they're not comfortable with that. I do a lot of curriculum writing. I was a teacher for 20 years, and I always had an interest in robotics and science, and this just kind of naturally built into becoming a specialist in doing this now. So I work mainly with underrepresented Title I schools and Native American. Those are our three focus that we have right now. that I spend a lot of time building curriculum and activities and everything to get them comfortable bringing it into the classroom.
And that's so important because there are a lot of biases and not everybody's represented in this area. So we're going to talk about it, hold this thought. So just to understand where everybody's coming from, how many of you are educators? Good, so kind of like a third of the room. Thank you so much for doing this work, by the way. This is like the most underappreciated and the most critical in everybody's life job. So thank you so much for your service and the work that you do every day. So how many of you are in the EdTech space? Another third. And anybody in just the tech space? Oh, many of you, okay.
Yeah,
Research, do we have research? Okay, so we have a great representation. Okay, perfect. So we're going to get a lot of great questions at the end. Okay, so let's start. Let's level set, because we have a lot of different people from different backgrounds. So if we can all maybe take a turn on defining what AI is from your standpoint, because I'm sure like if we ask 5 people in the room, they will have 5 different definitions, and that might be okay. So let's start with you, Liz, since...
I see it generally as a system's ability to take in, interpret, and learn from data to achieve a specified goal through flexible learning and adaptation.
Anybody else?
I'll take it. So when I think about AI, my friend told me it has the word artificial in it, artificial intelligence. So it's sort of like it's not as sophisticated yet as human intelligence, but I think of it as machines and, a way for us to use machines to learn and to sort of improve and augment what humans can already do. So that's how I think of AI.
I'll build on that because I'm a fan of the modern definition of augmented intelligence, whereas back in the day, in the early AI area, a lot of people were interested in making humanoid robots that really mimicked our behaviors and logic and conversation abilities. And now it's really moved closer to being in a supportive role and helping us make everything more accurate and efficient and higher quality.
To build on that, I still think that for the AI to take on that personality of a human as far as making the decisions and that sensory is still part of that in the elementary, in the all K-12 education. So I think it's a little bit of both for when I think of it, because those things are important. We need to, as a teacher, that's the first thing we think of is, how is the student going to react to this, and, what do they need, so.
Right. And I think it's a really important tool also for being able to scale, because particularly in the humanitarian sector, one of the major issues is how do you take a good idea or some work that people want to do and make it global. So what I really get excited about when you're talking about this artificial or augmented intelligence is that it can liberate people to do work that they otherwise would be caught up in some of these things. Looking up data, it can do it so much faster and allow us to do the work that we really need to do, in particular to reach the people who need it the most.
Absolutely. So I think we're in the intersection of time where we have a lot of different information. Data is abundant. We have huge compute powers that will be able to process this information and to create kind of like an aid for someone to reach their goal. So specifically for the education side, we still see, it's not penetrated as much in the industry, but I think it's about to happen. We're at the cusp of that, huge transformation. I'm wondering, how do you see that? How do you see the classroom changing, and how do you see also the role of the education of the educator changing, if there is a change at all?
I can speak to that because I was a teacher in a prior life, and before immersion, I worked with entrepreneurs to design innovative schools, and quite frankly, for the most part, schools haven't changed that much. I mean, some private schools have in the way we deliver education, but for the most part, public education still looks the same as it did 150 years ago. And I think there's huge room for AI to not just automate the work of teachers or learning, but really a lot of the processes that happen in public schools that slow educators down. And so there's been a stagnation, I believe, for the last 100 years of tech in schools. And a lot of people in the ed tech space are working really hard to penetrate it, but there's still something there that's preventing from, I think, massive scale, massive use. But parents want it, students want it, teachers want it. Like, they want more efficient ways to deliver learning and more ways to personalize the experience for kids.
And I think a lot of that is back to kind of what I do, providing that professional development. And without it just being the tech person. Who's the tech person in your school? I'm going to send them to you. That's not the person I want. I want the person who knows how to teach students. They went to school for it. They know what they're doing. I want to be able to facilitate that person. And they're uncomfortable. I mean, they sit and say, I don't know who sent me here, why am I here? And that's just a common thing. But I do think if the aid or the facilitator and the AI or some of the, I've read different articles about, being able to take, one of the fears in the school is the internet. What are they going to get on? And every firewall in the world's there backing, not letting them on. And I think if we can get to a point where the teacher's not worried about that, there's something else doing that for the administration and the teachers, that part will help.
Yeah. So, Margot, you talked about the educator wanting this tool in order to personalize or to create kind of like, a better learning kind of mechanism for their students. Do the others share this viewpoint, or do you think also that there are educators, or you see educators that might be threatened or afraid that they're going to be eliminated or replaced? Like, what is your vantage point?
I think that's one of the fears we hear the most is this question of, are you trying to replace teachers? But when you really talk to teachers, most of the things that teachers are talking about is not having the opportunity to do what they are best at and what they love the most, which is being able to reach and connect with individual students. So I think it's, maybe it's a PR problem, that it's sort of talking about how this can really supplement and make a teacher's job easier and also more effective. So I think the way that they can, as opposed to going through all of the time assessing each individual child, because you'll already know what the learning path for that child is. You'll know where that child, or in higher education, older student, what they're struggling with, and be able to have that really individualized attention. There's all sorts of other ways. I mean, there's certain things with some of the more mundane grading, certain things, the assessments, that will be freed up. And I think that to really think about how it supplements and enhances for learners and educators.
Right. That's a great point. I think that is overlooked. Like, there are some mundane tasks that are not necessarily where the value of the educator is, that this can be automated. And we're going to talk about kind of the pitfalls of this automation in a bit, that they can spend more quality time with the student and they can provide them that path. But I wanted to check with you, Liz, as well, because we're talking about, like, you touched on the personalized learning aspect, which is really great because, and often overlooked as well, each student is different, with different background, different skill set, they learn a different way, and a lot of times we kind of usher them in the same process. So how does AI manifest in the personalized learning space?
Yeah, so Age of Learning has spent the last 3 years in R&D, and now a product is launched called Mastering Math, and it's a game-based personalized learning system. I was fortunate enough to be part of the founding team and kind of help form the basis of a learning and data-informed design approach, so that data is not an afterthought in the system, it's actually part of the design thinking, as well as engagement. And when we're talking about game-based learning, it's quite a balance between finding the fun and have something that kids willingly want to engage in, and very strong learning design. Lots of times you either have a great learning design and a terrible game, or an amazingly fun game that maybe has something about robots and therefore teaches science, maybe we hope at the end, right? So this intersection of robust design and data is something that I feel like we did pretty well on our team and in this product, and it was really interdisciplinary effort. What the system does is it's for pre-K through 2 math fundamentals. There are some pretty shocking statistics. A majority of the students by 4th grade in this country are not proficient in math. And so we took a very granular approach. We broke down the Common Core standards into very, very small pieces and have learning modules for every single one of those. And the system adapts to students as they play and gives them what they need with formative feedback. And also the system is also designed to be assessive. So once the system knows basically as students play how much they're learning, so it can calibrate really nicely. One application of that to schools, which I thought was really striking, was a research study we did at the Watts School District last year, where we were able to use our system to replicate external pretest results. So we went in and we had a validated measure of math learning that we gave to the students before they started playing the app. This was also a randomized control trial, by the way. But the treatment group, the students that got to play, we gave them a pretest. It's called the Team of 3. And we knew what their prior knowledge was coming in based on that. Then we had our in-game assessment also measure their prior knowledge. And we were able to predict with very high accuracy, just based on play alone, what their Team of pretest score was. That was a lot of mumbling about prediction. But the point is that through play, we can actually get a very accurate estimate of what students know coming in. This is very valuable for under-resourced schools. Kindergarten teachers at Watts have no way, there's no assessment of math. They have no idea where kids are coming in. As a former teacher, I know that you cannot sit down with every single student and take their temperature with math, especially when they're that young, and you can't assume people read and all of this. So it can be a very powerful tool for supporting teachers and simply understanding where students are. Additionally, it was a powerful tool. We didn't actually even have integration with the curriculum. We had students play 15 minutes 3 times a week in the classroom, and just after an average of 5 hours of play over 12 weeks, we saw significant learning gains in treatment versus control. And it works for students of many different, or several demographic that had different backgrounds and also different levels of prior knowledge. So we've made some improvements based on our results, but overall it was very encouraging. And so I think it can really support teachers in that way and also offer some diagnostic support where there isn't any, especially in under-resourced communities.
No, that's a great point. So it's not just the automation piece, it's the upside of provided that personalized type of attention and recognizing that for students. I want to shift gears a little bit because and kind of like meander from the K through 12 space into the higher ed space. And maybe, Allison, we can pick your brain around kind of the role of the higher ed institutions and maybe the industry as well in the adoption of AI in the classroom.
All right, I'll try to answer that. I really think that universities, and I'm not biased at all, are a very unique place because of the diversity of people that are there and the new talent that comes up and really is interested and passionate in new technology, and just the ability to provide team building expertise and just basically make a diverse team on a dime. And so there's a lot of energy that comes and diversity and expertise. And so I think that the university system could be seen as basically a test bed of a lot of these AI. And obviously, with the history of AI starting with MIT and Carnegie Mellon and Berkeley being, the innovators, where all the real intellectual power has come from, it makes sense that universities would continue to help serve that role.
Absolutely. In that and also in conjunction to what you were saying, Carol, about the professional development, because if we feel like the role of the educator will evolve and will change, we need to provide them with the right training, with the right tools to really understand how they can take advantage of it in the classroom. I also want to point, and again, a biased view coming from the industry side, that the industry companies like Microsoft, like Google, a lot of other big big or small companies are investing in AI, and they're very willing and open to work with the education school, with the system, with the Department of Education, with the local organizations to make sure that we help and we do our part in enriching the classroom experience for the customer. So I don't want this to be overlooked, but of course it's my biased view, so take it with a grain of salt.
I want to build one thing on that higher ed conversation. Having worked in higher ed for a long time, there is a lot of pressure right now for higher ed institutions to talk about what is the value for everybody who's a parent right now, saying, okay, why am I saving up this huge amount of money, and what are my children getting from this? Especially now that we have access to knowledge, you can go and get MIT courses on a podcast, right now. You can hear from the best lecturers. So, there's this question of, moving from a lot of us when we were teaching, we're doing the flipped classroom model. And this is sort of the next level of that, to say all this work that students can do outside of the classroom, all the knowledge they have, so that when you are in the classroom, you can really make the most of the interaction between the professor and the student. So the student is now not sitting there listening to a lecture and sitting there, in the back of the room or whatever is happening for an hour, but they get to actually interact with top researchers. And then that is something that parents are paying for, or whomever is footing the bill.
Yeah, to add to that point, Coursera, edX, all these platforms are disrupting what it means to have a college degree now.
Exactly.
And I think there are a lot of degrees that are becoming obsolete. And there are people, like you can log on to Coursera anywhere, anyone anywhere in the world can learn computer science from Harvard or MIT in an instant. And so I think actually higher ed should be nervous, because there are a lot of technologies out there to completely disrupt the game, and industries looking for people with skills. I mean, because even Google, Facebook, there's an article out now, they're hiring people that don't have a bachelor's degree but can demonstrate competencies in certain areas. So I think higher ed is going to be disrupted by AI and technologies. And we at Immersion, we work with 60 universities, ed schools, which I think it's a bright shining star, because we're using our VR simulations to train and do PD in a different way. So now we can scale PD and make it look totally different. And it's so transformative to see someone interacting with an avatar, like kid avatars, and actually that experience of them learning how to be a teacher and us observing them learning how to be a teacher is very transformative. So I think there are technologies that can actually disrupt higher ed and what it looks now. So a lot of our institutions, I think, need to catch up.
Absolutely. And I think the value of micro-credentialing and certifications, it's kind of like, it's another topic that we can spend a whole other hour on.
Yes.
But I want to kind of like transition us maybe into, okay, so we talked about the value, personalized learning, blended learning, freeing teachers to do what they're really good in interacting, providing their interactiveness in the classroom for their students, automating some things. Now let's talk about the drawbacks. What are some of the considerations? Because a lot of times we feel like AI will solve everything, will address everything, it's a rosy future, and we should jump on that bandwagon. Mm-hmm. But from your experience, who wants to take it first, what are some of the kind of ethical considerations? And it can be a lot of different things, varying from bias, and I'd love to hear your international experience on this, and everybody, and all the way to kind of like, lack of human interaction, or a lot of, other things. So what are some of the drawbacks or some of the kind of challenges that you see?
I think we've all kind of hit a lot of them, but I mean, obviously rural areas not having access to any kind of device to do a flipped classroom or something like that. Thinking that just because you're Native American, we have to change the thinking for that. That's not true. When they want to be part of the picture, part of everything happening. Also, taking those students that learn or go to the college, are they going to go back into their community? That's a big concern. And that doesn't matter if it's LA or on a reservation or something like that. They want to make sure that they just don't leave because that's their community.
Right.
So those things are really hard to deal with when you're in a rural Oklahoma or Wisconsin and they have nothing. How's AI going to shape to make sure there's different ways to?
Right. And are they going to be left behind because of this lack of access?
Yes.
So are you like bridging the gap or are you widening the gap?
And actually convincing the parents that this is something that they can still do and still be a part of the community. Because a lot of that is they don't want their kids involved because it could mean that they're never going to come back to the community.
Yeah.
Super important.
Any other challenges that you see from your end?
Yeah, I think I've been in urban classrooms where I've seen schools say, oh, we have this new personalized learning tool. And sometimes you walk in and all the kids are on the computer all day, which I consider to be a disaster. I don't think that's how real learning should happen. Yeah. So I think if it's implemented the wrong way, it could be awful because you see kids copying and pasting on these learning tools. And we all know as humans, real learning happens when you're solving the problem, being creative, and the tech is to help augment that or accelerate the learning for the students and it should not replace a teacher ever, I believe. It should not replace the human being that is going to lead the kids towards something greater.
Right.
So that's where I've seen some of the bad uses of tech.
AI should be the facilitator. I mean, letting that teacher finally be the
Exactly.
facilitator, taking some of the load and the weight off of that she has with the paperwork and everything else, and just finally getting to step back and ask those questions that she wants to be able to ask, but doesn't always have the time, and that's where we want it to be. She's still an important part of that picture.
Yes, at the same time, she has to be very careful and not take everything the tool is telling her about that student.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a little bit about this because we're talking about the technology that continues to learn the more you use it. And if you use it in a homogeneous type of classroom, then it learns a certain algorithm that if you apply it to the wrong demographic or to a different demographic, it's not a wrong demographic, but then it will yield really bizarre outcomes. So can we drill a little bit on that? Because I think that's not often represented in conversations on AI. Emily has a lot of opinions.
I'm learning right now. Okay. I want to actually tie together what we were saying with higher ed with this question about bias. So one thing I do want to say, when we're saying higher ed is going to get disrupted, it is still an incredible place to talk about collaboration. You mentioned earlier about all the people who are there, about real world problem solvers, which is what we need. What we want the next generation of students to really be able to do is to think creatively, to be able to collaborate across disciplines, across borders. And that's where higher education has the opportunity to really engage in those ways. So I don't want it to be seen as one of those things like tech is going to come in, higher education is out, because this is the place. One of the things that I've seen in my work is we can't just have somebody who has one skill set solve the problem. So think about the challenge that we're trying to do with out-of-school children. If you only had software developers who are developing in a lab who don't know anything about the cultural issues that are going on in various communities in rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa, if they don't understand about the linguistics and the different forms of Swahili, if they don't understand the neuroscience, if they don't understand curriculum development and early childhood education, if they don't understand gaming, we need people who know all those different things and can speak to each other at the same time. So one of the things we found in our project, for example, if somebody wanted to use facial recognition technology, because we're assuming in a lot of these areas when children are in school, they're in really crowded classrooms. And even we have the tablets in these villages for out-of-school children, they're sharing the tablets. So we're saying, okay, how do you then assess and have individualized learning? You use facial recognition technology. Well, lo and behold, people are not designing that for African faces. So then the facial recognition technology was not being able to identify and differentiate because people are designing that in Silicon Valley or wherever and not thinking about those particular children. In addition, they're not thinking about children who have never had access to a tablet. So part of the thing that our designers had to do was say, how do you have a child who is, say, 9 years old, who has never held a tablet? use and do learning. We think, I mean, my children, I feel like they just came into the world knowing how to do this because they're seeing the adults all around them. Our designers had to figure out, how do you reach a child and say, you can only have one finger on the screen at a time, or you know, all the different things that are kind of intuitive, what it means to sort of tap something. And if the child can't read the instructions, so they're saying, okay, do we embed videos that show that? How do you talk about screen breakage or caring for the tablet? So all of these things about what community are you entering? Thinking about, is early literacy only for a 3- and 4-year-old like we might design in this country, as opposed to somebody learning literacy for the first time when they're 10 years old or 50 years old. You know, we're seeing a lot of instances, particularly for women who are the most illiterate in the world. 2/3 of the world's illiterate are women. So a lot of the mothers in the community are saying, I'd like to take a look at these tablets too and learn how to read and do math. So all of these types of things, and that's just one project. And you know, so when you think about that, so the design of that, if we have people who are trained early to think about, I need to talk to people who understand different cultures. I need to understand about people, hardware and software together. I need to understand these things all together and design for whomever that person is anywhere in the world. You've got to be able to be trained early in that type of thinking so that we can design the technology that we need.
And then beyond design, once you have the database that you are training the models on, you really have to be careful about bias in the data, because you could have the largest data set in the world and any bias that's in there, once you have a model that's trained on it, it'll really amplify that bias.
Yeah.
And so you really have to be savvy. We'll have educators who can work with the tools as long as they're savvy and know that there may be bias inherent in it and that they have to interpret it with a grain of salt. Right. Then I think that'll really supplement the teaching for everybody.
Yeah, I think data in isolation with no contextual variables can be a dangerous thing. I think the real challenge of data science is not programming an algorithm, because that's easy enough to learn. It's understanding what data you're working with. Did the data you're working with meet the assumptions of the analysis that you're doing? And what is a larger research question you're trying to answer? And that is something that, you know, if the research question is, how do we have accurate facial recognition for students all over the world? Then you can look at the data that you have in context of what's important from a human perspective, and integration of that whole scientific process of what do we want to explore? What data do we have? How does that match with our question? How does it match with the assumptions of the algorithm we want to use? Then, you know, then with results, how do you make sure the results are good? What are your goodness metrics? How do you actually interpret it to have impact on the original question you're asking? There's a whole holistic picture here in terms of a scientific thinking around big data that's very, very important. And so I think you get at a really good point. And it's not just cultural bias. We work with young students, so students who are 4, 5, 6 years old, and you know, understanding what's appropriate for media use, how to design developmentally for students that age, and working with different developmental needs even across age groups. So learning in cognitive science is super helpful, and building that into design is really key there. When you have a research question and you've examined your assumptions about data and you've aligned your algorithm and your interpretation and your insights, it's really important to feed that back into design so that there's a research culture built into sort of data-driven design, which helps kind of minimize some of these things that come up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, these are all great points. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions on this as well. I want to be mindful of our time. I want to also move us into another subject, a little bit more around how the AI is changing the job market, how it's changing employability opportunities. Once these kids go through and graduate through the system, they're going to enter a job market that doesn't look like it does now. And a lot of times we're training them to, have careers in areas that don't really exist right now. So how do we feel, that AI is changing the employability landscape and the job market? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it adding jobs? We know, Gartner said in 2017 that AI is adding 500 more jobs every year, 500,000 more jobs every year, and it's creating new jobs in 80% of the organizations. So it's all really great, but is it also creating, is it taking jobs out, or is the whole landscaping changing, and how do we can prepare the students for this?
Okay. Yeah, so we spent a lot of time thinking about that. So, of course, the McKinsey report, 40% of jobs will be automated in the next 20 years. A lot of the communities we work with, they're already seeing it. So, I mean, the other day I was in Whole Foods, there was a robot scanning the aisle. I was in LAX, and there was a robot working in LAX. And so this is just the beginning. There will be autonomous vehicles coming, and going back to the equity issue, the most vulnerable communities are going to be those right now with low-wage workers in retail. A lot of those jobs will be automated. Driverless cars, truck drivers, that's going to be scratched out. And really, it's the creative industries that's going to see the greatest growth. So really, creativity, social emotional intelligence is really going to be what's valued in the marketplace, I believe, because we're going to automate. But where it's a global race now. So I was at an AI in the Future of Work conference at MIT 2 years ago, and the head of AI of China was there, talking about how they're educating all of their students in computer science, and they're in a global AI race. So now we're competing globally with talent. And so I think it's going to be, once again, for the most vulnerable populations, just a hard situation. I don't think we've thought about it policy-wise yet. But I do think college is still going to be important. It's going to be different. Like, the role of college will be different. It won't just be, I'm teaching you how to be a lawyer. Lawyers' jobs are being automated. So I think it's a bright future. I think we'll have to shift very quickly what we see as work. But I just don't think a lot of our institutions, our education institutions, and society is shifting quickly enough.
Right.
Yeah.
I would really like to think that teachers and intellectuals, professors are more secure in their future than in industries like retail and manufacturing, because those usually have limitless opportunities for automation, whereas in the classroom and in more creative and innovative fields, it still requires a lot of human cognition.
Yeah.
Right? Kids can only learn so much and retain so much and learn so fast.
Right. Yeah.
You still need the teachers to be
Yeah,
for them.
that's the human. There are some jobs in the McKinsey report that they report are hard to automate. One of them is education and learning. It's tough to do that right. Do it the right way.
And holistically.
Holistically, yeah. I think along those lines, I think in supporting 21st century skills like creative problem solving, or some even might call them soft skills, virtual learning worlds can be of great use in partnership with learning analytics and machine learning to help understand what students are learning as they interact and to support their growth as they progress. For example, the work at Glass Lab with SimCity EDU measured systems thinking. Creative problem solving was actually one of the things we were able to get at with Plants vs. Zombies EDU. And that was a lot of fun. I mean, I think the virtual environments have a lot of potential for supporting the growth in these areas in a way that multiple choice tests simply cannot get at. Yeah, here's a multiple choice question with 3 answers on creative problem solving. Yeah, it teaches you there's only one right answer, somebody else already thought of it, and it's always in academic language. Not really the truth, right? So I think virtual environments can really help with that. Another thing is learning science supporting more complex or soft skills in virtual environments. So for example, this idea of grit or persistence, something that we've been able to do is build behavior detection of grit within the Mastering Math system. So we're able to determine, just based on interactions, whether students are wheel spinning and really getting lost in the system. Fortunately, that's a low percent. I think we have 5% of students in that category right now, but we're able to detect for that versus productive persistence, and students moving at their own pace and learning at their own pace and moving through difficulty to conquer challenges. And that sort of measurement is really important as we move into future employment.
I mean, adaptability, I think, is we just have to prepare our children and future leaders to know that they're not going to know. So as a mother of 2 children, I don't know if this is the right thing. I'm not saying the world's best mom, but I always say, the 2 most important things are curiosity and kindness. And I say that hopefully for them as individuals, but then when I think about also the skills that they will need, if they are open to people and able to connect with people from wherever, and if they are curious about the world around them, because curiosity will lead to being able to say, well, maybe I'll learn that new skill, or maybe work can look like this. And it is hard looking at modern day schools, as my children are entering school, that there still is this industrial revolution kind of model of training them in this way. Some of it is really important because you have to learn sometimes that the world does not only revolve around you, but there's also something about really making sure that they can just adapt and learn and change and do things their own way, because they're going to have to forge their own road over and over again.
I think these are great points, especially as we look on their role as a parent, that I'm sure a lot of you have, or a coach, if you're coaching young people, the fact that they need to be adaptable, they need to learn these soft skills. I don't particularly like the word soft skills because they're really critical skills, like the ability to collaborate, to think critically, to problem solve, and then pave their own way, because not all of them will become, part of a machine like it was back in the 1920s. They will be entrepreneurs. So Todd is giving me this sign that I think we have time for maybe one last thing. So we talked about what this is, what AI is, how does it change the role of the educator, what are some of the pitfalls, things to be aware of as we're embarking in this new path. Talk a little bit about how the future of jobs might look like. And now, let's end maybe on a futuristic note before we take questions from our participants. Maybe you can take a crack, look at your crystal ball, and see where are the AI technologies taking us in education. What should we expect? What is some wild things that might sound wild now, but they will happen probably in 10 plus years
Or sooner.
Yes.
I think if I had a wish, it would be a collaboration in AI, because that is where we need them to be collaborating, thinking together, using those computational thinking skills to solve real problems. And so if there's some kind of collaboration within AI, we don't want it to just be that one person.
Yeah.
And so that's the most important thing to me.
So it becomes part of our DNA, part of our way of thinking, and not like a specialization.
Yeah, well, it's no longer just that one person or that's the smartest person in the class. It can't be that anymore. It's not that anymore. So we've got to change that into, a collaboration, a group of people, because it's not just the small percentage it used to be.
Did Todd tell you to say that?
No, I think Ross might have.
I'll go next, just down the line. Just if we take education industry as a very broad term, thinking about learning and research and science, I really think that AI has the potential to help with virtual clinical trials. So we can make synthetic data that really is very accurate and test many different hypotheses and treatments without actually harming, without the risk-benefit analysis.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that's a great point.
So actually, we get a lot of our wild ideas from the kids. So at CTech, we run a Kids Shark Tank startup lab for kids. They're 8 to 14. And so we had a couple of teams, and they wanted to redesign school. So one group had an idea for a robot teacher, because they felt their teacher didn't respond quick enough to their issues, even some of their social emotional issues. So they wanted a robot to roll around the classroom.
Check on the well-being of the classroom.
Check on the well-being. And they created a product and actually a prototype and wanted to do this. And a lot of what we're seeing, another team of kids, bullying is a huge issue. So One student wanted to create sort of like a guardian angel drone, where the drone would follow her from school and the data would feed to the iPhone app or whatever.
Wow.
And moms and teachers would see it. And there was data, she was 12, data flowing. And so we get excited about this and we try to fund their ideas. They are who we should be asking, what is AI? And they didn't know what AI is.
Yeah.
They just knew that they wanted a robot teacher because their current teacher was too busy and they wanted someone to talk to.
There you go.
And they're cool with a robot being in the classroom.
Yes.
And so that's where we get all our fun ideas. And we fund them to do this and prototype them. And
That's
so
amazing.
I see that's the future.
Yeah.
If we ask the young people.
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, whenever people talk about the future, there's sometimes this way to talk about it like it's predetermined. And I think the thing is the decisions that all of us are making, you know, whatever brought you here tonight, wherever we're sitting up here, to know that the decisions that we're making tonight and tomorrow and who we are asking to find the solutions is going to determine what this looks like 10, 20 years down the road. It's not just something that's going to happen to us. And I find it interesting, almost every conversation about technology, at some point somebody talks about it, it's this external thing, like the robots are coming to take our jobs, you know, as opposed to something that we are all making choices about and engaging in, from the apps that you click on when you're voting with whatever you choose to click on, you know, to whatever your job is, how you're instructing, who you ask for where ideas should come from. That's what's going to change the future of it. And hopefully if we have people asking the right people and the right questions, then that's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely. We all have a role.
Yeah, along the lines of what panelists have said, I think that hopefully AI supporting education comes along with a shift in teaching methodology that is more student-centered. So when I first started teaching, I taught how I remembered being taught, which is you unscrew kids' heads and you pour the knowledge in. And then you screw their head back on, right? There were no unscrewing, or students were not harmed at all. But I found that to be incredibly ineffective, especially in students in underserved communities who are literally in middle school, the age of gang recruitment, were trying to survive the walk home. And taking care of their little brothers and sisters because parents were working 80 hours a week just to afford basic living. And I think that making school relevant for kids is really important. I had the opportunity to shift to a more student-centered model when a principal came in to our school, and that was 2007 now, another lifetime. But she really introduced project-based learning, which is a constructivist methodology that focused on kids really building context for their own learning and their own pathways. And so I see that personalized learning, which really supports students on their own trajectory, can really help support teacher as facilitator and a student-centered learning approach. And so I hope that's what's in the future, because I think that is a real bright side of AI in education.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation, and we're not done yet, but I think we have time to open it up maybe for some questions. Yes?
Yes,
Maybe
we
you
do.
have a question. I think we
Ross
have
in the
some
back.
folks with, we have lots of questions. There you go.
Hello, am I on?
So if you can say your name and ask your question, and then if it's directed to a particular person.
Yeah, please
No.
just ask a question and no statements. That'd be awesome. Thank you.
Sure. So my name is Ian, but this question's actually from my mother, who works for the state of Kansas in Topeka. She has, I don't know, 500,000 students, 1,300 schools in the state of Kansas. So she's working at the macro level. What do you guys think are going to be the challenges or things to watch for as you scale up these ideas to the state level?
Obviously, just what she talked about, changing the classroom and how we actually deliver information to our students, and that it's hard right now. I mean, it doesn't need to be the expert; it needs to be all of our teachers, and changing that professional development for our teachers.
I think the question of Bias is important too, because you're looking at a lot of different populations as we scale up. So really doing research and understanding your assumptions about the data and your ability to generalize that is very important as well.
Yep. Great.
Hi, my name is Mike. I'm a MOOC developer. The question I have is regarding AI and also basically the data. Social networks and other types of things have played fast and loose. And I'm pretty sure school systems are not exactly excited about, the various different platforms and what they've been doing with data. So I think AI and the data itself is going to be problematic, getting it into any kind of a system, into the unified school districts. Charters, maybe. Then it's homeschooling, most likely, are most likely to be receptive. What's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question.
I'll just jump in quickly. I think data privacy and data warehousing is a really important issue to address, and I know for a fact that most schools don't have a solution. And some folks at Digital Promise are actually starting to provide a free service that gives a database and different access that's secure and that sort of thing. But I think just even from a data privacy perspective, it will be difficult.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry. I have a question about diversity and inclusion, specifically around artificial intelligence. I've done some work with the Silicon Beach Diversity Meetup, and the numbers are absolutely dismal. There's a huge gap right now, and I'd like to know from anyone on the panel, what is the ethics of what happens within the context of this, specifically in the classroom? Obviously, that's a big, big issue right now.
Well, we could speak to that because equity is why we started CTech, but it's sort of like the big problem, going back to what you said, is who's building the AI. And it's typically one demographic building AI. So I think right now this country has a crisis in terms of who's learning computer science, who's learning the tech, and who's using and who owns it. So for me, ownership of the technology and building and creating technology, there's huge equity gaps. And so it's going to take a lot, even in the state of California. It is so surprising how I read a statistic, only 500 teachers are certified in computer science in this state. So even as a state, we are, even though we have Google, Facebook, and some of the biggest countries, we aren't educating the general populace at a high rate, but it's even worse for Black and Brown in parts of California. And so really, this is huge. One of a USC professor who's on our board studies how kids learn tech. And one of her studies showed that 70% of kids that do computer science as adults learned it from their father. And so when you think about communities where there are single-parent homes, low income, and I thought myself, when I was 7, my dad taught me how to build a computer from scratch because he was an engineer. But everyone doesn't have that. And so it's things like that that's happening in our society that we're blind to. And even for girls, we did a DEI training in FIRST Robotics. Turns out that I was doing it all wrong with girls. If you help girls with tech, they found that people who do tech most likely help girls in robotics, which actually hurts them. And so even if you're helping a young girl do tech, you're sending a message that you can't do it by yourself. So it's things like that we're trying to work on as we educate students and teachers to not perpetuate, but on a larger scale, I think the state and the nation, we really need an agenda around how to close these gaps.
And then multiply that 6 billion times for
Right,
the rest of the world.
for the rest of the world.
Because we have that here in California. So I think that is
It's
making
huge
sure
problem.
we're also, so addressing all the many issues still here in this country, but then always thinking about in terms of access, are we making sure, are there programs that for people who may have slower internet connection, for example? and making sure that we're asking people to solve problems for their own communities and not assuming that Americans can solve everybody else's problems. So it's the same thing, just on a global scale, for sure. And this is why, again, we need to have the diversified curriculum when we're teaching, and in college, where I'm a huge fan of liberal arts education. People always say, like, well, what are you going to do with a degree in ethnic studies or ethics? And it's like everything.
Yeah. I just want to add one more thing to what you said. There's a great journal called The Failure Issue. It's created by Engineers Without Borders. It's basically about how Western engineer types go to third world developing countries and they think they have the solution, but they fail. And so I really like it because it's really about how, we come with our own biases, but they don't always work in another context. And I love how they embrace failure and to fix the problem.
Yes.
Hi there. My name is Brandon Gilman. I'm with the Daily Titan. I'm their digital editor. So I really love what you guys are saying about algorithmic bias. I think it's really important, especially going on a global scale. I think we're touching on that. I think each of you have all touched on that a little bit. So instead of talking about it, because I feel like we're all on the same path of wanting to be global, do you have any experience with bringing this technology globally? Do you have like any story that you'd like to share with us?
Age of Learning has products all over the world, including China and some Asian countries, and I think there's an Australian product launching, as well as Spanish-speaking countries. And it's something that we're starting to explore. I know that in working with Tencent in supporting ELL in China, the way that product was designed was very different, and there were a lot of different cultural sort of components that had to go into the design, and we did our homework on that. Data is just starting to come in, and so I would like to have a beautiful data story to tell you. But I think it will be a really good opportunity to understand what does prior knowledge look like in students in different areas of the world. How do people learn differently, and what are even patterns of interaction that are different, and what do people respond to sort of from a cultural level. I think data can really help us out with that, and I'm excited because the Age of Learning is poised to be able to make this kind of data-driven inferences.
Our nonprofit does a lot of work with China and different things, so it's always interesting to watch the parents interacting with their students. It's very much different than we do, and for us to have differentiated learning with them is difficult because they want the answer and they want to know it and be spot on and practice and get that right. So we're working through those situations as we move into different areas, trying to teach differently, or actually for parents to think differently, because it's more about solving in different ways than it is just getting it correct. There's not a correct answer.
If I can address that, our whole project, I mean, we're the Global Learning X Prize, so it is all about going global with this. So, I mean, maybe we'll have to hang out over there, and I'll have all sorts of stories about implementing in Tanzania. But the point of how we designed it to be open source, that was the main idea, to say we're not assuming even what we designed or our teams designed specifically for this population in Tanzania is going to work for anywhere else. So when we're talking to people who are working in refugee communities, for example, or just any other place in the world, that we're saying, here's just the basic code and here's all the data that we've learned. We're making that all free, accessible, the code's open, the data is open, and say, now world, you say what you need for your particular community. And I think that's one of the things, it's going back to that question of not saying that any one person or one company is necessarily designing for it, but making things that are open and available for people to say, this is what my specific community needs, whether that's aligning with their particular national curriculum or something totally else. And then also trying to find business models that work. I mean, one of the things we say is, great, if we have this technology that works, but children are in areas that are very difficult to reach, it can take us literally, 7 hours from the capital to even reach one community. So how do you then get these sort of infrastructure? So let's think about not just the software, but then building things like, can you have the communities that can use, say, a credit union, so the communities can pool their limited resources together to purchase something like 5 tablets in a bag with a portable solar charging station with a brick or some sort of accessibility that then the whole community can share. So thinking in those sort of models would be some specific examples.
Hi, sorry about that. Kai Chang. I am a angel investor in about a dozen startups, some of which are in the AI space, and advisor in about a dozen more. And it's a more complex question, but I want to get your perspective on this. As the Western perspective is, a lot of you are talking about diversity, about like bringing up this bottom quartile, a lot of effort toward this. And, I'm an immigrant. I came here when I was 6 years old, and my first memories was my father working the midnight to 7 a.m. shift at a grocery store, stocking boxes, sleeping in the backseat of his car, probably super illegal by CPS standards. And so I'm the beneficiary of it. And we get to kind of have this thing. Everyone here in this room is very privileged. We get to kind of talk about the ways in which AI can improve our lives. And I wonder, in China, the perspective is very different. Their priority on AI, on technology investment is everything is diverted toward the top 10%. If you're not in the top quartile, we really don't care. And there is and it's very indifferent. The Chinese perspective is that if you're not already organically in that top quartile, it's a waste of resources to spend on you. And I wonder, side by side, you have Western perspective with this diversity inclusion perspective of spending significant resources, bringing up the bottom 25%, and you have the Chinese perspective of divert all national resources toward the top 10. Side by side, which would end up prevailing over the next 10, 15, 20 years? I mean, unfortunately, I don't like saying this, but I feel like China's going to win, but I want to hear your perspective, given that you're in the space.
I'm not going to try that.
Wow, that's a loaded question.
That's a good one. That's a great question.
Anyone?
Well, China may win in terms of sheer numbers, but in terms of, in terms of addressing students from all sort of areas in the percentile range, I guess it depends on what context we're talking about winning and losing. Even if we work with students in China or other countries that have different values that way, and we can help support students in the lower quartile, that means they have better skills than they would have otherwise and may have more mobility across nations and in a global economy that they might not have had otherwise. So my argument would be sort of from a humanitarian perspective to say, great, let's support excellence, but let's also support personalized learning for all students.
Yeah, I agree. Mm-hmm. And I mean, look at the case of Jack Ma. He's from China. He was not in the top 10%, and founder of Alibaba. And he says all the time, he applied to Harvard, 10 times, he didn't get in or something like that. That's his story. He was not in the top 10% of highest performing students in China, and look what happened. So what I like, I think China right now though is investing in AI at a much more rapid and aggressive pace than we are. Yes. So that's probably why we will fall behind, because the investment in their people in this is really gonna hurt the U.S. and the West. And so I think that is what's hurted us. But there's still a spirit of creativity and ingenuity that we have here in the West, in America, that really, I think, keeps us going, keeps us fresh. But I do think the very specific financial investment in AI is really what's going to drive it. It's not just China, it's also Russia and some Middle Eastern countries as well. But the US, I think we're just, our brains are being shifted toward other issues, which are not good, and we should really be focusing on the future and where we're moving towards. Yeah.
And none of us are going to win. We are all on one planet, at least for now.
For now.
And if we are not addressing everybody's concerns, I really do not believe that people can solve the world's problems if you're not engaging the world in those solutions.
Yes.
We will not solve them, and we have to be able to engage people, or we're all going to just burn up on this planet. So,
Yeah.
we've got to engage everyone.
Hi, my name's Noelle. I'm an academically trained biologist that's now an educator. My question is, giving some backtrack, my experience in climbing the higher echelons of higher education is there's a lot of diversity and perspectives that fall through. We tend to self-select when we get into PhD, postdoc level. We're losing a lot of creativity and diversity. How do you think that AI can help address this situation and actually identify individuals that would excel in STEM and science and be able to be a part of that community in the future?
Great question.
I think it starts little. And we've got to introduce it early and support it.
Plant the seed early,
Have to.
nurture them. I think AI also might have some potential in putting together some algorithms to identify some talent early on and putting resources toward, making sure that they hold the potential and succeed.
And train the IA to look for that. I mean, that's the thing where it's like it's responding to what we are putting in.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is there's a big gap between our educational training and what the actual job requires.
Yeah.
So reverse engineering, what does the actual job require? And then building AI to help detect that and draw that out in people is probably going to be a really good bet in predicting future success in the field. And I think that's a part of that we have to do, because right now with our outmoded education system, in my opinion, we have a lot of things that reinforce, okay, memorize this fact, take a test, and you're going to do really well. All the information in the world that you need is completely deterministic. It's included in this book. So if you just memorize this, nothing can go wrong. I mean, it's like that's what we learn in school, and it doesn't help us in the real world when you get out there and understand, even if you do your homework and are a good boy and a good girl, and it doesn't necessarily impact how you do. And so I think educating students about what jobs really entail, helping incorporate that into actual curriculum, and then having AI that supports assessment of the actual things that are going to be used is probably a good step towards it.
Hi there. My name's Brian Pierre. I'm an AI researcher. I work in the ed tech space, and I'm also an open source advocate. And it's not hard to see that today education or the schools, they instill the idea of competition being virtuous. And as we look into the crystal ball, into the future, we can see the machines are coming to take away our jobs. So let's presume that they're destined to liberate us from the mundane and take away the repetition, and we see what's left. It's the creative people, the people that build the machines. But now we're starting to see with the 20th anniversary of open source just passing that collaboration works better than competition. And how does that change things as far as what the future looks like far away?
I know that as teaching elementary, middle school, and not doing a competition but a challenge has really raised our percentage of girls. We have about a 72% of girls because it's not a direct competition. So I think that collaboration girls succeed at. So I think hopefully that will raise.
I think that 2 quick comments on that. I think crowdsourcing solutions is something that major companies have started to do. For example, Netflix in a recommender algorithm, and there was a competition a few years ago, which ironically, a very simple algorithm outperformed the most complex, intense solution. Anyway, the simplest algorithm is usually the best answer if it can solve it. I'll just finish my plug on that. But crowdsourcing solutions, it can be very powerful. I think when we come to data, open source is difficult. So there are some repositories for data and learning from student patterns that already exist, that the data has been scrubbed and de-identified with full consent from participants and all of that. The PSLC data shop is one of those places. But in terms of data, it will be a sticky issue, I think. And I think it's an important question in also getting personalized learning to students who need it. So there's a sense of equity in education and open source software and things that can help students across the board at low cost is a really great idea. I think how to fit that into business models and the current landscape is an important consideration.
You guys touched this a little bit, but we tend to focus more on the development of AI, more than the ethical issues of it. And you said we need to shift quickly with AI. So from an economic standpoint, a lot of people will be, jobs will be replaced. How are we going to address that if those people jobs are replaced? Their kids will be affected. How are we gonna switch? So if we don't talk about ethical issues, how are we gonna do that?
We'll learn from China and see what they're doing. If they're advanced, we can.
It's like a
learn
paradox.
from
Like
them.
we focus more on ethical issues, or focus more on development of the actual AI.
It's probably a balance, of course. Looks like he has a answer. Does anybody want to jump in on that?
The issue of AI is a human issue. And so I think that we do need to start thinking about how this is going to affect humans. I mean, there are people saying universal basic income will be a thing where we all have the same income because everyday things we do in life will be automated. We won't have to worry about going to work anymore. So that's one vision of the future. But I don't know how I feel about not doing anything all day. I would like to do something all day. But I think it is important now. I don't think China is a good model, actually, if you're looking at how to treat people with AI, because they limit search engines, like what you can search for in China is not fully democratic. So I think there's conflicts there. And I think we need to have a local conversation here in California and a national conversation around what's going to happen, what is happening now, actually, in many parts of America where people have been unemployed for a very long time because jobs are being automated and things are really hurting people financially in many parts of this country. So I think it's very critical right now that as leaders, especially people in tech, to have a voice for what's happening.
And I think you also answered this question previously in the panel. It's changing the way we teach and the way we learn. It's educating the educator to provide this guidance to the student to learn how to learn so that they can be adaptive, they can kind of like, be entrepreneur, they can create new things, even though we don't know what these things are. Uh-oh. I think you'll need a mic, though.
The question I wanted to ask was I sense a through line of this hurdle for AI in general and ML, which has to do with, hi, I'm Jamie, which has to do with trauma. And I think one of the biggest hurdles I've noticed just generally in the world with any community, especially a vulnerable community, is the hurdle of getting over trauma. So when I hear stories about little girls who come and say, I want a robot to hug me, it really concerns me that people are having conversations up here about like learning math and basic skills and not really realizing that there's a much larger social issue that needs to be addressed. And I think this is like, as technology starts to sort of automate things, and these processes start to make more and more people sort of come into this category. We're losing the middle class, obviously. The question I have is, what are some of the things that you are doing or have thought about doing or hurdles that you've faced dealing with this issue of dealing with trauma, and like what are some of the solutions that you have thought about or have encountered in terms of how you can address this issue?
Yeah. I'll talk about that because we have worked with a lot of very vulnerable communities, and people that we are looking to carry on this work when the competition ends are often working with vulnerable communities. So there's all types of things people are working with right now. For example, ways that software can teach empathy, can connect children to other children and know that they're not alone in their experience, to use technology to connect people. I think also things like when somebody doesn't feel like they're stupid, starting with that. I mean, there's a lot of kids who have shame because they feel like they're not on par with the rest of the kids. So looking at ways that technology can equalize from the beginning and build the confidence. We're testing in Tanzania the social emotional development of the children, their aspirations, their confidence levels, their grit and persistence is one of the things we're measuring. So there's ways that people are looking into embedding games that teach that, chatbot that people can communicate with each other, trying to overcome social isolation. There's a lot of tech that people are using that can do those sort of challenges, looking for depression and other mental health issues. So, I mean, there is a whole host of things. I think it's about connecting those, making sure that those are embedded and seen as critical. And I think that is, if we're having these conversations now, that's the type of thing we can be teaching our children and embedded as critical just as much as learning you're not going to have to sit and memorize your multiplication tables, but think about how do we address these other social emotional issues.
Yeah, and just to add, we work with a community in South LA called Westmont, West Adams, and it's actually called Death Alley, the most murders per capita in all the US. So we see trauma. And so a lot of the kids have been amazing at using tech to heal. So virtual reality is one. I mean, there's AI, but there are a lot of VR applications, and we've seen that as a huge hit with both kids and adults in terms of like immersing themselves in a different world. And there are apps actually for wellness, social emotional development that have been effective. And we encourage them to build. Every time a child comes to us, they want to create a technology, going back to what you said, that hits a social emotional issue. They feel bad about something like homelessness that they see, and they want to make the world better through tech. Because we had some kids create something called XCOP. They were concerned about police shootings, so they wanted a car that scanned cars for metal weapons to, so that police could know if there was a weapon in the car. And I'm like, the military might have something like that already. So, but it always comes from a place deep. And I think it's up to us to help kids create, that helps them process the trauma and really makes them feel good about making it better, like the world a better place, actually.
In addition to that, just generally, this idea of digital citizenship, how to be a really good community member of the now worldwide sort of social network we have, is an important place, an area to educate kids. So how do you be a good digital citizen? How do you support other people and prevent bullying? How do you keep your security if someone approaches you and asks you for something inappropriate? You acknowledge that, and you can shut that down and have tools to deal with that. And so I think that as part of education can also help.
All right, we have one last question.
Do you mind if I add one thing, just as an example from an industry standpoint? You might want to look at the example from Finland, which is the most kind of like one of the most recognized and celebrated educational systems. It was institutionalized by the Department of Education, the whole notion of well-being, and there is a way to measure it and take this information right there in every class, in every day. And they created a whole initiative called Happy Schools. So you might want to take a look at it, because this is kind of like the paradigm for how global education is thinking. Yeah. Sorry.
No problem. You guys are all been very patient and amazing. So we have one last question, and after that, we're going to thank our panelists, and then we'll go out and network us a little bit more and call it a night. But our last question is back here in the back.
So real quick, this is Ross, by the way. I'm going to hand this over in a second. I did want to say there were over 12 questions on this side of the room still queued up, and there were more on this side of the room. So please keep the discussion going afterwards, okay? I'm going to hand this over now.
Thank you. First of all, ladies, thank you so much for your comments. Very invigorating. I'm Anthony Maddox. I'm at SC. I'm a science teacher educator that's also in the School of Education and the School of Engineering. We just started a startup called EdVentures in the School of Education, and also we're basically dealing with trying to grow a venture fund there. Here's my question. What should we be looking for when evaluating early stage AI startups for our next cohort?
What should we be looking for when evaluating early stage AI startups?
Well.
Loaded question.
Yeah. Oh, is it? Okay. What are we looking for at early stage? All right. Am I saying that right? I want to make sure I got the
what
question
should we
correct.
be looking for in early stage
early stage startups?
Exactly, AI startups.
Yeah. So that there is an ethical filter, that there is a filter for bias, that there is a global lens, that there is diversity in perspective and expertise, collaboration across fields. And I'm saying this more for the design perspective, people who might be more in the investment space. So, I mean, I'm not sure what would make the most money from it, but the tech that I would want to look for, or if we were running a competition, some of the things that I would sort of design and say, something that is going to, what we're always looking at is let's try to look at what is the ideal future we want, say, 20 years down the road, and what is the really exponential technology that we can use that's going to pull that future in. What can we do to try to make that happen in 4 or 5 years rather than 20 years? And so, from my perspective, that is all of those things about ethics, about global, about collaboration, about making sure we're not repeating the mistakes of the past. If you just do the exact same thing that happened before and you just make it a digital version of that, whether that's like, some people think, okay, it's ed tech to just take a textbook, digitize it, boom, we're done, which is, misses the whole point. Or these questions of bias where we've seen when people aren't addressing this and you have the same sort of stereotype, bias, prejudicial thinking that we've had in the past. So I think those are the key things that at least I would be looking for in filters.
Also from an investment perspective, you would want to be sure that the product is good. And so instead of a wild, wild west approach of like, hey, I found this package in R and I'm going to try it. Or I have a hammer, so everything is a nail. It's a sense of, you would want to look for scientific rigor in the sense that holistically approaching the problems, not just, I have a super smart engineer, but like, what are the research questions that are driving the product? How does the data align with your research question and your algorithm align with the research question? How are you testing the assumptions of the algorithm against the data that you have? How do you interpret models? What is your goodness metric? And then and not just, okay, I know this model's good, but then the sort of scientific overview to say, what does this mean in relationship to the original research question or intended use of the product? And that there's iterative, data-driven, research-driven development.
All right, everybody. Let's give it up for our panel. Now, there's one thing I forgot to ask. Obviously, we're here talking about education. So with a raise of hands, who here is an educator? Who here works in classrooms? Beautiful. If any of you work within kindergarten and 8th graders, this Saturday we have a free workshop that teaches you how to code and work with robots. So if you want to learn more about that, or actually you want to learn anything about our organization, go to joinai.la and you'll learn more about that. But again, this has never been possible without Google. Salty.
No, and thank you, Todd, for your collaboration, and also thank you all for coming. Thank you to the volunteers. A lot of the work has been going through our staff and our volunteers.
Amazing group of Googlers here, volunteering, our own staff, our own volunteers volunteering. Really, everyone, thank you for coming out. This is the first of many. Next month is around sustainability and climate change. We're doing an entire summit around AI Earth's. It's called AI Earth Summit. It's going to be our first annual one. We really are going to bring out environmental scientists, technologists, and just community members to really workshop some of the world's greatest problems when it comes to climate change and sustainability. So if you're interested in helping save our planet, please, again,
no pressure.
Come on out. We would love to have your support. There's a lot of scholarships in place. See me after. We've got an hour worth of networking outside. There's drinks in the courtyard where you saw before. Again, please get home safe. Meet someone new. Learn something new. Have fun. Thank you all for coming out. See you next time.